I wasn't a hard negotiator, and I loved to say yes and please people, so I had to come with an exorbitant price tag on the front so I could say yes and please people a couple times and still walk away with my skin.
Welcome to another episode of the Essential Craftsman podcast. I'm Nate. I've got my dad here, the Essential Craftsman. We are talking about negotiation. First and foremost, do you consider yourself a good negotiator?
I don't really think so. I don't really think I'm only a middling businessman generally, and it seems to, at least from my perspective, watching other people who've done better in business, it's almost always because they are really great negotiators. I think I'm probably about a 60% or something like that, I would guess.
How do you even judge a good negotiator? Does that mean persuading or getting a good deal? There's an implication of almost like taking away from somebody else, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. How do you even define a good negotiation?
I guess I like to think that I try to play nice and like to leave something on the table for the other guy. But if I'm really honest, I don't think I've always shot for that. So I don't know. I don't know a lot about that, but I think that it's best when you can be happy to come back together again and negotiate a next deal. Maybe that's a criteria. If you negotiate one deal with somebody and you're both willing to come back and do business again, then it was a good negotiation. You know, maybe I have in the back of my mind realized that even when I was in a stronger negotiating position, if I capitalized on that too hard, I'd be slamming the door on future interaction with this person that would amount to having lost that negotiation. You know, maybe I'm drawing too much out of that emotional capital with one negotiation. I don't know. Right.
Is there one type of person or individual or negotiator that you generally don't work well with or don't enjoy? Or
selfish people are not fun, right? I mean, I've got I've been blessed with a lot of great friends, and as I think back over who those people are, not one of them was selfish. You know, as far as and when you run into somebody in a negotiation that you can tell right off the bat, whoa, this person is really is only thinking about extracting everything they can extract. It's like, show me the door. Yeah, I've got to do something else right now, because if I waste any more time here, one or both of us is going to be really unhappy.
Yeah, I've seen that on a big scale and a small scale. On a big scale, selling real estate, some people will be asking and negotiating and like trying to claw things back till the very last second.
Thing.
They are just constantly undermining and complaining and negotiating for, more, usually money or better terms or whatever.
And then those people, after the deal closes, 6 months later, you're going to get a letter from their attorney, and they're going to try to continue to negotiate, this time with the point of a gun.
It is an absolute nightmare, and you can sense it early on once you kind of have a deal with the person, and then they keep, bringing up all these other things, and it's like, wait, do I have a deal? And then in a smaller example, this happened just last week. In fact, I mentioned this camera. We were going to buy a new camera. Not a new camera, actually, another camera like what we already have, so you could have one in the shop for forging.
Right. How did that go? Did we talk about that?
The deal was worked out, and they wrote back and they said, well, actually, for that price, I won't include the bag. It was like this camera backpack. It's probably worth like $40 new, and the camera was $1,000 just for reference. And dead deal instantly. Instantaneously, I lost all interest in meeting the person and buying their camera, in maybe giving them not satisfaction, but it killed it for me completely. Yeah. And I didn't want the camera bad enough to have to capitulate on that little backpack.
In fact, the car we're driving right now, we found it on Craigslist. Man, the price was good. It seemed like a great deal, and we made the deal over the phone. I think we were talking to the wife, and it was exactly what we were looking for, and it was remarkably under where a lot of the other automobiles had been. And between the time that we made the deal on the phone and we were driving 3 hours over to pick up the car, they realized that in some way they had not refreshed their ad on Craigslist or something, and so the number of people that looked at it had gone to almost zero. And anyhow, they had lowered the price because of a lack of interest, and then they realized the lack of interest was because of the way they had posted the ad. And then I showed up and they made the deal, and they realized, oh, if we would have cleaned up our ad, but we kind of had a deal. And so when I got over there and I was counting out the money in cash, I don't know, it was $6,000 or $7,000 or whatever it was. He wanted another $100 bill right then, right then. But I was 3 hours from home, or I would have turned on my heel and said, thank you, man, thank you, but no thanks. So that is, there's a negotiating style that defeats any chance of future interaction. We were talking about this before we started the camera rolling, that you've had a lot more experience in negotiating purchases, because you turned a lot of properties in Arizona, like a lot, dozens and dozens and dozens of properties. And most of my negotiation has been in negotiating a sale price as a contractor, where I'm coming with a proposal and a contract, and here's what I'll do. And so what I finally got to, and I'm not sure this speaks to your question, but what I finally realized was that I wasn't a hard negotiator, and I loved to say yes and please people. So I had to come with an exorbitant price tag on the front, so I could say yes and please people a couple times and still walk away with my skin. And so so this contractor arrangement with a prospective client is not a pure negotiation like we're talking about maybe with an automobile, but that's the way that I approached a sale, was like that.
And they really are different. When you're negotiating a purchase or a sale where you're both going to part ways with some piece of personal property,
right.
That's one thing. But when you're negotiating labor and a service and risk and access and expectations, that probably should really be a whole different conversation, because wow, I mean, if someone's asking for concessions from what you've proposed,
the negotiation includes a lot more than the bottom line. And the concessions or the demands can include a lot more than just dollars, and so it's really complicated. And in that, the contractor's at a profound advantage because he understands these, or he's potentially at an advantage because he understands or should understand more about those soft aspects that the homeowner may or may not be thinking of. And so when the homeowner is focused on the dollar amount and the contractor is thinking of all the other ways to prevail in the negotiation in spite of giving ground on the dollar amount, I mean, there's a built-in advantage there. That I never capitalized on it very well, but I learned to at least protect myself.
And I'm sure it's been the other way, where a client has, pushed so hard on the price and kind of put you in a box where at the end of the job you are kind of losing, and you walk away thinking, I will never give an inch because I just lost 3 weeks and whatever,
So right then I walked away thinking, okay, that's it. I'm putting 5% more on my overhead and profit markup from now on. And then the other thing, back to the earlier part, was I'm never playing with this person again. And there's been a lot of times when people would call me back up or email me, hey, I got another project, inviting you back into the game. Let me recommend my good friend, somebody else.
Somebody you hate. There really are some skills and some tricks, and it really is something that people have to learn and develop. So are there tricks you employ or techniques that work for you when you are going to make a purchase on an item, let's say a vehicle or a tool or something?
So there are tricks I've read about and learned about that should work for me, but I cave pretty easy, and that's a problem. That's a personal deficiency. But one of the first ones is, and probably everyone listening to this is shouting right now, don't lay down the first number. Don't stake out your position first, and that is a really great rule.
To me, I think it's actually the opposite.
Really?
And from what I've learned, and from my, the method that I use, is actually the exact opposite, and I can explain why. Number one, the first number that gets said is so important, because that's everything after that in the conversation is revolving around that number. Even if the number is like a low ball or way too high or something, that the next comment is going to be about that number. And so what I learned from a friend in Arizona, who I think was just a fantastic negotiator, best I've ever seen. He's really was amazing. He would always make sure he said the first number, but he would just make sure he prepared the person a lot before he said that number.
Interesting.
So for example, if it was for a house or vehicle or whatever, let's say a house, he would, before he spilled the beans, and splurged this number, and he's an investor, so he's buying property well below market, and these numbers would be
wholesale
considered
real estate prices,
low balls. So this is not like this is not a fair market value
not
number.
Play nice. This is low ball.
This is real, investor cash purchasing. Anyways, he would spend almost an uncomfortably long time talking about all the things wrong with the property and kind of getting their expectations, thinking like, oh my gosh, this number is going to be like pennies. What's going on here? And then when he would give them a number, which was still a fair price, I don't misunderstand this, he would get whatever the fair price would be. It might not have been what they were thinking, but by the time that number came out, they were, number one, expecting it. Number two, often expecting worse than that.
So they brightened up when
kind
they heard
of
his number.
And even if, as was the case a lot of times where there was no deal to be had, the buyer and the seller were too far apart.
Right.
Even if that was the case, by starting with that stake in the ground at that, let's say, low number or a high number, if he was selling the property, he would do the same thing, say all the reasons why the property is incredible and worth this high price, and then he would say the number. Even if they're far apart, the person would have to like start at that number and like work their way back down. So that really made a lot of sense for me. And kind of the only way it works is if you understand completely and perfectly what your item is worth, whether you're buying or selling it. You have to know what it's worth. Another important strategy in negotiating and getting a good deal, whether you're buying or selling, is just the general approach, almost like the intangible things, what you're wearing, what the person thinks of you. If you are negotiating with someone you've known for years and years and years versus someone that you are just meeting in a parking lot or something, these first impressions are really important. And
They are.
I've seen people use that to their advantage in two ways. Someone might dress to the nines and be in their fanciest truck and really try to convey a atmosphere of success and wealth and like, I know what I'm talking about because I'm obviously so successful.
Right.
But for me, the way that that's been utilized that is the most helpful is actually the opposite of sort of coming into a negotiation, underplaying your hand, not showing your cards, driving your oldest, most busted up work truck, and with the approach of like, well, this is kind of what I can afford and maybe it's worth more. And I found that at times when the person has this mindset of like, well, this is a working man like me and I know that blah, 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 it can be also helpful as opposed to thinking, hey, this guy's got deep pockets and I'm going to, get every dollar out of him.
So true. Whales are only harpooned when they come to the surface. As long as the whale's under the surface, he is safe.
Yeah.
But when he comes up and shows himself and breaches and spouts, that's the time he's stuck, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a way to think about what you're talking about, flying under the radar.
Yeah.
There's safety in that.
The fellow I mentioned in Arizona who I learned a lot about negotiating from, Vladimir, was a Russian guy, and his education was all street smarts, and he had the doctorate in it. And
Advanced degree.
Yeah, oh man, he was teaching the class. And we did a lot of business together and as partners, and also we had to negotiate several deals on opposite sides of the table from one another. And man, I was kind of scared the whole time, just knowing like, man, this guy doesn't lose. One thing that helped me, and I feel like each of those negotiations worked out great because we both understood the value of the assets we were negotiating over. But another trick that really has helped me a lot of times is by not being in a hurry and being able to wait even a day or two and not let somebody bully you into making a decision right now. That's almost a guarantee. It's not a guarantee, but that's a good way. Your red flags should be going off and buzzers should be beeping if you're negotiating with somebody and it's sign now or the offer is off the table. I mean, that's a red flag to me.
And the opposite side of that coin is in a negotiation, when you recognize the deal is good for you, do it right now.
Exactly.
And insist that it happens right now.
I enjoy learning and hearing about negotiation. I think it's one of those things that you absolutely have to develop your own method and system and what works for you. I've tried, when I was younger, I kind of thought, okay, well, you walk in and you'll lowball the person, and it just, I couldn't do it. I still can't. If I'm even negotiating over a used barbecue and I'm walking in thinking I could save $25 on it, I just pay them what they're asking, because I don't like that moment of having to take somebody off guard and whittle away at something that's implied. So I love deals where the price is, already on the table and it's everybody's on the same page, and you snatch it up quick, and it's, all of the usual things. But I certainly don't like, I don't know if anybody does, but pushing somebody back and pushing them and pushing them.
Some people do. Doggone it. Some people do.
Yeah, twisted people who do that.
That's for sure.
I loved getting that camera deal, like I mentioned. I just puts a smile on my face. It's still for sale on Craigslist. And I just chuckle every time. Like,
should I go in as a straw buyer and see what happens?
No. Let this sit for a while. They can just hold on to that camera.
That's funny. Yeah. So there are few negotiators in the world better than a 3-year-old. Okay, a 3-year-old is a hard negotiator. Yeah. And we got to recognize that, and there's this fine line as a dad between insisting that your children obey you and giving them the latitude to learn to negotiate.
Yeah.
That doggone it, because that's one of the things they're learning. Like, puppies rolling on the ground, learning to fight and stay alive.
Yeah.
Those children are negotiating with each other and with you, and they're learning to negotiate with someone who's in a power position. Now that's that's a valuable skill.
Yeah, it is. You want them to win some of those negotiations, but you don't want to just squash it out of them. Leo, my oldest, we've just been noticing this lately, and this is a good lesson I could learn. The kid he just doesn't give up. He'll ask about something over and over and over, and sure enough, sometimes we just relent. We're like,
we're
fine. And I could probably do better at that, because lots of times if I asked, they didn't want to sell it. He's like, well, maybe ask him again. So
I said, I'm a straw buyer on the camera.
Yeah, but you're right. Kids are inherently, they come out of the womb negotiating. Just from the first minute. It is innate.
Yeah. Rolling back to Jordan Peterson and watching all you kids raise your kids. It's a wonderful thing to watch, by the way. But his criteria is that up until age 9 months, the child is always right. Always right.
Oh.
And it doesn't matter what that baby needs, but up till 9 months, they get it. Okay.
I see.
All right. Then after 9 months, you have to start carefully regulating that, and you have to be ready to enter into the negotiation as the power. Anyhow, so he has a lot of interesting things to say about that.
Don't negotiate when they want a bottle when they're a month old.
But so his message is that after 9 months, you got to realize, mom and dad, it's a power play.
Yeah.
And so the negotiation is on, and the it's fun to watch.
We're going to wrap this up, and this will actually segue nicely to our future episodes. We did a conversation a few episodes back about Larry Hahn's book. We mentioned we're going to start a book review, book club component to the podcast. We were talking about it before, and it's not going to work, I don't think, for us to kind of read the same book and let the audience know what we're reading and all of us read it together, because even you and I want to read different things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And even if we did both read the same thing, by talking about it, it felt like we would be spoiling it for any audience members who didn't read it. Mm-hmm. And I plan on reading some fiction, so I don't, we don't need spoilers.
Sure.
I bring this up because what we're going to do is let you know what we are individually reading, and then we'll circle back and each of us kind of give maybe like a review of the book, like a trailer of what we read, and let you know. And the book I'm reading has a lot to do with what we're talking about right now. It's The Rational Optimist, and it fits because
who wrote it?
Matt Ridley.
Okay.
And it is all about the value and how human beings, as they exist today, have developed and acquired this wealth by trading, mm-hmm. and sort of division of labor, and this negotiating and interacting with two parties, and both of you come out wealthier than you did before, is a big part of where the wealth of nations,
mm-hmm.
Is that Adam Smith?
Mm-hmm.
This is not a new concept, but anyways, he makes a case for why it's reasonable to be optimistic about the future, because that component of our humanity that we're trading and making deals just creates wealth, and we're going to keep on doing that. So
interesting.
Anyways, that is certainly related to negotiating, because we're trading all the time. You know, our spec house, you haven't noticed, but all of our subcontractors and the materials, and we're going to start having some of the roofing was provided to us by Tamco, which is a big roofing manufacturer. That was kind of a negotiation how to get their product in there in the right way, and we're just finding ourselves doing more and more, you know, conversations with different types of people and with each other. In case you haven't figured it out, there's a pretty heavy amount of negotiating, even just in how it is we make these videos, and it's not always obvious at the beginning, and so it kind of gets like shook out in the end. So
yeah, and you know, just kind of bouncing off of that to the end of this podcast, but thinking mostly in terms of the interpersonal negotiations inside of families and inside of communities and inside of friendships. I've watched a lot of people make the mistake of deciding in these negotiations that they would rather be right than happy. And that's just a thinking error, to think that it's more important to prevail in this negotiation than to either concede or come to some compromise where you would in fact be happy. It's so counterintuitive. It's so counterproductive. It's acting against our best interest sometimes in these kinds of things. And so I guess that's something where I try to be self-aware enough to know, wait a minute, am I so hung up on being right now that tomorrow or the next day or a month from now when I look back, I'll realize that being right came at the expense of being happy.
You just really want me to go buy that camera.
Would you please buy that camera?
I get it. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. We will put this on our second channel, EC2. We might cut some pieces of it into a video at some point on the main channel. I'm not really sure the best way to use the videos here, but the camera is rolling. So if you want to click over to YouTube and take a look at the little setting here in the corner of the garage, check it out. And with that, we will sign off and catch you next time.